Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and I want to welcome you to Schwartz Report. Today's podcast really was driven by what happened in Iowa yesterday. You know, I sit at my computer and watch streams of data trek across my desk. This is the data that influences and shapes America's future. And the details teach the trend if you can find the pattern. And once you do, you can see it swell and retreat like the melody in a symphony. And I was really brought to that awareness last night as I watched the evangelicals shape how the Iowa caucus was going to come out. So the details teach you the trend if you can find it, the pattern. And the trick is to put all judgments aside. Just follow the data. Don't have any cherished outcome. Some of the trends are easy to track and describe. Some trends are not. But what happened last night was pretty easy, and that made me think about it. So that's really what I want to focus on today. With some trends, the principal problem is the signal to noise ratio. Climate change is such a trend, where the most notable thing about it is the complete divorcement on the conservative side of data from any real political conversation. It's one of the denier movements, and denier movements, upon close examination, are defined mostly by the fact that they are completely fact-free. They're just misinformation. And this denier trend is part of an even larger trend, what I call the growth of willful ignorance. It's a worldview notable for being formed through the deliberate exclusion of relevant data. Creationism is climate change, climate denial's cousin. And between them, they require almost all of science to be discarded, and some trends can hardly be spoken of at all. And the trend that I really wanted to focus on is the rising power of American theocracy. What has happened to Christianity in the United States? From personal experience and from studying research data, I make the distinction, or a distinction, between religion and spirituality. To me, one is a construct of mind. People have to decide something is divine for it to have power and become a part of their religious experience. When experiences like that happen in the secular context, we call them either genius or psychic. When it occurs in the religious context, we call it spiritual revelation. The non-local experience of consciousness, which has been reported across time, geography, culture, is one of the human constants. In contrast, religious dogma is limited and exclusionist. Only believers accept it. A non-local experience is modulated by its context. So if you are having an experience within a religious context, all the dogmas of the religion become involved. If you're doing it from a non-religious, spiritual context, then you see it as an extension of consciousness, higher consciousness, if you will. As a trend, the various dogmas, theologies, ontologies that make up the spectrum of religions are largely fixed data points. Being perceived as revelations, they change slowly, if at all. Religion as a social influence, though, is a trend whose effects can be quantified, like education or economic status or regular exercise. And that's really what I want to do. As I write this, for instance, the entire budget of the United States, like a silent movie heroine, has been hung out over a cliff to be saved at the last moment, we hope. Why? Because by threatening a government shutdown, a movement that is principally made up of older white evangelical Christian Protestant conservatives attempted to block the budget unless the country's leading women's health and contraception service, Planned Parenthood, is defunded. The Supreme Court turned it over to the states with the Dobbs decision, and now the conservatives want to create a national policy of abortion and even contraception control. It's very strange because what it's doing is creating two healthcare systems, one for men and one for women in the red states. Ostensibly, this is because Planned Parenthood's operation involves pregnancy terminations, abortions. But this is actually a sham. The people making this argument know they're lying, because anybody that looks at Planned Parenthood realizes that only 3% of Planned Parenthood's activities involve terminations. That 3% doesn't get any kind of federal funding at all. This is well documented, and claiming ignorance about it just isn't credible. The other 97% of the organization provides all kinds of health services, pap smears, testing for STDs, breast exams, and that's where the federal money that goes to Planned Parenthood is used. Those seeking defunding know this as well. They also know that many women who use Planned Parenthood are women of low incomes, little education, and no particular political power. They're just easy targets. Essentially, then, this must be seen not as an attack on abortion, as much of the media describes it, but as an attack on women, making them second class, a political action in the service of the interests of the religious right is really what's going on. It's utterly ideological, and theological power has become the fulcrum of American politics and economics. It has this strange kind of Christianity, not really about Christianity. It uses biblical language, but it has nothing to do with what Jesus teaches. But it has taken over the Republican Party, and that became very clear last night in the Iowa caucus. So are you okay with that? Because I certainly am not. I think it's time that we look at religion not through the lens of divinity, but through its reality on how it affects human society. What is the effect of religion, particularly the fundamentalist premillennial dispensationalism that has come to define what the media particularly mean when they say Christian nationalism? The social sciences give us the ability to collect and examine actual facts that can answer this question. And I think that's what we ought to focus on. So that's what I am going to focus on. The system the founders designed required that there be a firewall between church and state. Conservatives don't believe this, or they choose not to believe this. But I'm going to prove to you that the founders were very, very clear about this. Men like Adams and Franklin and Washington and Jefferson had in their own lives or in their immediate family histories of family people who had suffered when religion and politics got mixed together. The English Tudor world for them was near history. None of the founders was unaware of religious violence and conflict. They knew, for instance, of the struggle going on as a result of Henry VIII between the Roman Catholic and the Protestant Reformation that tore the British Isles apart, and the struggle between the established churches and the growing number of anti-establishment sects and congregations. They encouraged churches not for their doctrine, but for their ability to instill in immigrant populations coming from many different backgrounds the deistic Ten Commandment values, but in a cultural, not a political sense. They were very clear that although the United States was Christian in a generic sense, because the Europeans who had come to North America and created the country came out of a Christian cultural value, but it was not a linkage to any Christian faith or its manifestations with America as a nation. And here's the real clincher. This was all explicitly spelled out in the Treaty of Tripoli in 1797, which stated in Article 11, and I'm going to quote it, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Think about that. The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. And this treaty of 1797 was nothing casual. The Journal of the Executive Proceedings of the United States Senate described how the treaty was read aloud on the floor of the Senate, how copies of the treaty were printed for the use of the Senate, and that it was sent to President John Adams, who immediately signed it. Ed Buckner, a scholar who has explored this in detail, explains, and this is a quote, "Nor is it plausible to argue that perhaps senators voted for the treaty without being aware of the famous words. Not possible. The treaty was short, only a couple of pages. It was printed in every newspaper in the new United States. This is about a decade after the Constitutional Convention. The lack of any recorded argument about the wording, as well as the unanimous vote, that's right, unanimous vote, and the wide reprinting of the words in the press of 1797 suggests that the government was not Christian in a linkage of church and state. Yet today there are powerful forces seeking to break down the founders' firewall, even as they proclaim their reverence for the founders. Who would have seen the budget holdup? The kind of struggles going on in the House of Representatives today as anything other than an unacceptable intrusion of religion into politics. Part of the difficulty in assessing this trend is that in Orwell's 1984, nothing is quite what it seems. But thanks to the spectrum of social metrics, data, real data, not just political argument, we can work out what happens, what is happening as religion attempts to take over shaping American culture. Let's start with willful ignorance. I've talked about this before in the podcast and in the daily Schwartz report. I think it is one of the most destructive trends that has ever shaped America. The entire trend can be summed up by this report on a poll by CBS News. In it, they found Americans do not believe that humans evolved. Think about that. There is no evolution. The Gallup organization addressed the same issue, but also included the age of the Earth and conducted a series of polls of American adults in 82, 91, 93, 97, 99, 2001, and 2004. In each trend, the wording of the questions was kept the same, so that the polls would be equivalent and multi-year analysis. Here is the data from the poll taken in November 91. The only significant difference between this and the 2004 poll is that in 82, 44% held the creationist view, and in 2004, the number was 45%. In 2005, the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press and the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life carried out a poll of 2,000 adults that shows another version of this. And they reported that 42% of the public, the Republicans, believed that humans and other living beings had existed in their present form since the beginning of time, and that this rose to 70% amongst white evangelical Protestants and decreased to 32% in mainline Protestant churches, and surprisingly, to 31% amongst white Catholics. None of this would be a problem except that the Republican Party, shaped by the evangelical movement, has politicized all this. The Gallup organization, after analyzing their polling, said, quote, "The majority of Republicans in the United States do not believe in the theory of evolution and do not believe that humans evolved over millions of years from less advanced forms of life." Those who attend church frequently are much less likely to believe in evolution than those who seldom or never attend. The Republicans tend to be frequent churchgoers, and that explains their doubts about evolution. Schwartz report is based on facts, and I'm not making that up. At the end of every episode, you can go and check the research that I used to create this podcast. I provide it every week, and I encourage you to go and dig deeper. You will find the link at the end of the episode, and it will allow you to be able to check everything I'm saying, and it will allow you to become the kind of citizen we need to support democracy.